I am a fan of the Gears of War franchise. I've played every game in the series and really liked almost all of them. I also discovered relatively recently that I enjoy tactics-style games, so Gears Tactics seemed like a game I was going to enjoy very much. And I did enjoy it, mostly. There are issues with the game that I'll get into that over my playtime with it definitely put a damper on my enthusiasm for it, but it didn't snuff it out completely. I played Gears Tactics on PC for one playthrough on normal difficulty. This video will have light story spoilers, but there really isn't that much of a story to spoil. You have been warned. Gears Tactics is a good looking game. I began playing the game on ultra settings, but I'm still trying to work out the kinks in my recording settings on PC, which has been a real pain in the ass, so I dropped it down to high for the majority of the game. So FYI, if there are any frame rate issues or weird visual things in the footage, it's the recording's fault, not the game's, because the game ran basically flawlessly once I got the right settings for it. It had no crashes, bugs, no nothing the entire game, and it ran at a silky smooth 60 frames per second. The game also has a lot, and I mean a lot, of different graphics options for you to choose from, and as a new PC gamer, I was kind of like, I don't really know what some of these do, but I'm sure more seasoned PC Master Race types will enjoy the suite of options on offer for them. It is made with the Unreal Engine, so you'll see your fair share of pop-in and load-in, and up close some of the textures don't look that great. However, 90% of the game is spent from a top-down view, so it's not that big of a deal. Character models are highly detailed with a good amount of customization options. You can change your armor and weapon colors and materials, and some features of your randomized recruits, but this feature never really appealed to me that much, so I only played with it a little bit. I'm sure most people will be happy with what the game has to offer in this regard. I think that the Gears of War franchise has always had a pretty strong audio and visual identity, and Gears Tactics continues that tradition. There are many sounds that will be familiar to series veterans that you'll hear over the course of the game, such as the fast footsteps of the roadie run, the smacking of a burly body into a wall as your character takes cover, the sound of a lancer revving up and sawing through the body of a locust, and probably my favorite one, the little audio cue that plays whenever you accomplish an objective or finish a combat encounter. The score also has some series motifs, such as those dark foreboding string melodies and delayed horns in the menu theme, but there are a lot of new ideas here as well that fit that aesthetic and atmosphere of Gears pretty damn well. I wouldn't say that it's gonna win any awards necessarily, but it definitely fits in snugly with the rest of the franchise. I've always loved the architecture of Sera, the planet that the Gears franchise is set on. I don't know anything about architecture from an academic perspective, but I know cool buildings when I see them, and the Gears series is full of them. The buildings are massive with lots of stone structures that admittedly do a better job of building atmosphere in the main series when you are looking up at the buildings as opposed to looking down over them. But the series' visual flair is still present here along with the chunky and chonky character designs that are the franchise's signature. While I was playing through the game, the Xbox One and Xbox Series versions of the game were released, and to coincide with that, the PC version got a big update that added a few things and changed other things. Firstly, the game's UI changed with this update, which is why you'll see both versions of the UI in my footage. The new UI is blue colored, whereas the old UI is colorless, so that's how you can tell which is which. Personally, I think that the new UI is much better than the old UI after I got used to it. I don't think I've ever had this experience before of a game's UI completely changing as I was playing through the game. Secondly, the update also added a whole new campaign mode called the Jacked campaign. The Jacked campaign adds Jack, the helpful little AI drone that's present throughout the series, as well as add deviant enemies, which takes the enemy types already present in the main game and gives them various tweaks and or buffs to offset Jack's inclusion in the game, as Jack adds a 5th unit to your squad in a game that was designed for 4 units, so it just balances out the campaign a little, from what I've heard. I didn't actually play any of the Jacked campaign because when I finished the main campaign I was pretty done with the game. I had my fill and I was full. But it's a pretty great free update along the lines of what Sucker Punch did for Ghosts of Tsushima with their big Legends update. The game also allows you to skip the tutorial on repeat playthroughs, which is a nice touch. Gears Tactics is chronologically speaking the first game in the series timeline, as it takes place 12 years before the first game and begins with the destruction of Jacinto, a pretty significant event to any fans familiar with the series. You play as Gabe Diaz, who is the father of Kate Diaz, the protagonist of Gears 5. Gabe is tasked with hunting down and killing a special locust called Ukon, who is causing major trouble for the COG. I'll just give a brief summary without spoilers to provide some context for the rest of the games for those who aren't really familiar with the series. Locusts are monsters that appeared from beneath the ground on Emergence Day and started slaughtering the people on the surface. They're the bad guys. The Cog are the military of this world, and the Gears are the soldiers. They're the good guys, essentially. Gears Tactics story isn't anything to write home about. I mean, the Gears of War franchise has never been known for its amazing narrative or anything, but even when held up to some of the games with weaker stories in the franchise, this game still doesn't compare that favorably. I think part of the issue is that the characters are really bland and uninteresting. The Gears characters from the main series, Marcus, Dom, Baird, Cole, Kate, JD, none of these characters are super deep necessarily, but they are memorable, and their personalities bounce off each other well and give a real sense of camaraderie in the stronger stories of the franchise. But Gears Tactics just never really develops the characters or their relationships beyond a surface level. There are a couple twists and turns that the story takes, but again, it's not anything that special, which is a shame because last year's Gears 5 was a high point in the series in my opinion in terms of its narrative and story. They really tried with Gears 5, and I was hoping that the same amount of effort would be put into this game. Unfortunately, that didn't turn out to be the case. I mean, there are some cool tidbits of the story for fans of the series, like getting to play as Kate's dad, seeing how he met her mom, and fleshing out some of the lore surrounding the destruction of Jacinto and the origins of the Locust, but speaking as a series fan, it wasn't enough to hold my interest. The game's combat is pretty damn good. Combat is turn-based, with each side moving all their units on their turn. Each unit has 3 action points, which are used for every action a unit takes during their turn, whether it be reloading their gun, moving to a new location, or firing their gun. Unlike most other tactics games, Gears Tactics does not use a grid system. You can move your units where you'd like on the map so long as you have enough AP to do so. This comes with its own advantages and disadvantages. It does allow for more free-form movement, and the game also lets units slide into cover from a pretty good distance like you can in the main Gears titles. But it's also a little bit finicky, and it can be unclear sometimes as to why you can or can't reach certain parts of the map. Sometimes you'll be able to move somewhere that seems too far for you to reach, and sometimes there will be places that you feel like you should definitely be able to make it to that you just can't. Personally, I like this system in this game, but I also think that a grid system would work perfectly fine as well. Each unit has a primary weapon, a secondary weapon, and a grenade. Primary weapons are things like the Lancer or Gnasher. Pistols are secondary weapons, and there are 2 types of grenades, Frag and Stim. There are 5 classes in the game: Vanguard, Support, Heavy, Sniper, and Scout. Each class has their own primary weapon that can't be changed. However, you can mod each unit's gun with various stats and buffs that increase things like damage dealt, ammo capacity, or accuracy, along with some mods giving that unit a passive skill like that unit's Overwatch skill doing more damage. Mods can be gained from crates that are either found in the map during missions or as rewards for completing missions, or optional objectives for each mission like reloading less than 10 times or not having any downed units. When I first saw the crate system, I was very apprehensive since even though I do like the Gears franchise, it hasn't exactly had a good history with microtransactions. However, to my surprise, there aren't any microtransactions in the game at all. Hopefully this will carry over to the next entry in the series, though I'm a little doubtful about that. Each unit has their own skill tree depending on what class they are, and each skill tree has 4 different branches to choose various active and passive skills from. For instance, the support branches are Surgeon, Combat Medic, Paragon, and Strategist. Each of these branches has a specialized upgrade path for a more specific build, but you can pick and choose from each branch. For instance, the Surgeon branch is more geared towards healing individual units, whereas the Combat Medic is more tooled towards healing multiple units and giving buffs to the whole squad. Active skills are skills that you need to activate while in battle, and passive skills are always active. You can have multiple units of each class and have very different builds for each of them. It's a great, deep system. If a unit is downed on the battlefield, it can revive itself once per battle, or it can be revived by another unit that comes to its aid. Each time a unit is revived, they get their full health back, however their max health is decreased each time a unit is downed. If a unit is downed too many times or isn't revived, they will die. If a story important character dies, then you'll either have to reload a checkpoint or restart the mission, but randomized units can die permanently. It's a very frustrating feeling to have a high-level unit be killed in a difficult mission. You can reset a unit's skills if you need to change their build for whatever reason, but those reset tokens are limited. All the usual suspects show up in the game, from your basic wretches and grubs to your more exotic boomers and cantuses. And the game does a very nice job of introducing each enemy type in a gradual drip feed over the course of the game. A couple enemies will drop their weapons upon death, the boomers and Theron guards, and you'll be able to pick up their weapon and take a few shots with them. I do wish though that there were a few more weapons you could pick up during missions like the Hammer of Dawn. Bigger Gears enemies do show up in the game as boss fights like the Brumach and the Corpser, and these boss fights are well constructed but also kind of tedious, particularly the last boss fight of the game. Figuring out how to tackle each fight is fun, but once you figure it out, it becomes a bit of a slog fighting off waves of infinitely spawning regular units while whittling down the boss's health, as they all have a little bit too much. It's pretty amazing how well the Gears of War formula translates into a tactic-style game. Moving from cover to cover, multiple units fighting against waves of enemies, a good variety of enemies to fight, executions giving each unit on your squad an extra action point that turn, it's like it was always meant to be, and I really hope they make a sequel to this. With all that being said, the game definitely does have some issues that hold it back. The two main ones being repetition and the lack of variety in its mission design and gameplay loop. The game is around 30 hours long, which isn't ridiculously long, and I did enjoy the gameplay and combat the entire time. However, there just aren't enough mission types to span the whole length of the campaign. There are only a handful of mission types, like retrieving crates while avoiding nemesis bombs that slowly get closer to you every turn, or rescuing captive gears from torture pods and evacing with them, or holding down control points to stock up on supplies. And after the 4th or 5th time of doing the same mission, I was losing some enthusiasm for the game. What doesn't help matters is that the game has side missions in between each main mission, only they aren't actually optional missions, you have to do them to advance the story. Each time you need to do the side missions, you'll get a few to choose from. In the earlier parts of the game, you need to pick 2 side missions to complete from a selection of 3, and later on, you need to complete 3 side missions from a selection of 4. These in-between missions just feel like unnecessary padding and filler that really hurt the pacing of the game. You can't use the same units in more than one side mission per chapter, so you need to make sure to use non-story related units in the side missions throughout the game to keep them sufficiently leveled up, otherwise you might find yourself without any good units to use for the tougher side missions. These missions do have their own modifiers that add little twists to them, such as each unit can only have a maximum of 1 shot before having to reload, or your unit's Overwatch ability doing 0 damage for the mission. But these tended to just be more annoying than anything to me, and they didn't change the fact that you were still doing the same things in these missions the entire game. And there's a few other things that could have been pulled from the main game, like the different kinds of mechs and vehicles that can be operated across the series. There could have been some missions involving your units operating mechs or tanks to wipe out enemy bases or something. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. Gears Tactics is purely a tactic-style game. There's no extra layer to the gameplay here, and while there's nothing wrong with that, I think it would have been nice to have something else to do in the game besides just the combat. For example, games like Fire Emblem Three Houses or Wasteland 3 have great tactic-style combat, but they also have more things to do besides just the combat. Three Houses has this cool aspect to it where you are a professor at a school and you get to explore and interact with your students at the academy and do various activities like small side quests or teach in class or do things like cooking and eating with your students. And Wasteland 3 is a full-on CRPG with a bunch of quests and characters to meet and a whole world to explore and interact with lots of choices that the player can make to deal with various moral and ethical dilemmas that you'll come across. I've never played an XCOM game before. Well, I have played the Bureau Declassified, but that's a spin-off to the XCOM series in the same way that Gears Tactics is to Gears of War, but I do know that the XCOM games have a base building mechanic on top of the combat. I just wish there was an extra layer with this game like there is in those other games, as just going from mission to mission doing the same types of mission over and over with nothing to break it up gets very repetitive. I mean, at one point you come across a group of civilians and join up with them, and they have a giant transport vehicle. So there could have been a base building aspect to the game incorporated pretty easily where you have to upgrade your mobile fortress and manage resources, and maybe even have some missions where you need to defend your vehicle from locust attacks or something. Spin-offs of long-running franchises can sometimes lead to less than stellar results, both in terms of the quality of the game and how well it still represents the spirit and feel of the series. Gears Tactics succeeds on both fronts. It effortlessly translates the Gears formula to a new genre of game while also being a very well-made game in its own right. While the game does have a few issues like a pretty bland story, not having enough mission types to keep things fresh the whole campaign, and the game could definitely use another wrinkle to the gameplay, the foundation here is pretty rock solid, with great visuals and sound, as well as a core combat system that is just great. I'm going to give Gears Tactics an 8 out of 10. The next review is going to be Spider-Man Miles Morales on the PS4. At this point in time, I have other expenses that need to be dealt with before buying a new console, and the PS5 seems to have a surprisingly large number of issues that people have been running into since launch, so I think it's not a bad idea to wait a little bit anyways. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting your thoughts on the game. Thanks for watching.